Thanks for joining David, Kevin, and myself for the educational video for the month of November. We hope you and your families are all doing great. I know we sure are. Well, after 18 months, we finally got a new budget. David and Kevin are going to walk you through the important things for you to know about it. But as always, if you have any questions, want to review anything, please don't hesitate to call. Thanks. Take care.
The federal government is framing this new budget as a nation-building effort, where their plan is to make Canada more resilient to the various impacts across the globe, less reliant on any individual trading partner, like we have been with the United States, and really ready for long-term economic growth. Over the next 5 years, the government plans roughly $280 billion in new investments. They're projecting a deficit of just over $78 billion, which is roughly 2.5% of our GDP, in the 2025-2026 fiscal year. And that deficit they're projecting will fall to around $56.5 billion, or 1.5% of our GDP, by the 2029-2030 fiscal year. This is one of the government's two new fiscal anchors of their budget. The second fiscal anchor is that they plan to balance their day-to-day operating budget, which is ensuring that revenues cover all non-capital spending, including debt servicing costs, by the fiscal year 2028-2029, and to steadily reduce the deficit to GDP ratio.
Tariff response and trade diversification was another theme highlighted in this year's budget, as that was largely what Carney was elected on, was the trade war with the United States. The government is pledging $12 billion to support strategic industries and workers impacted by U.S. tariffs. This includes $5 billion over 6 years for a new strategic response fund, of which $1 billion will be earmarked specifically for the steel industry, and $3.7 billion over 3 years for enhanced employment insurance. They also aim to double non-U.S. exports over the next decade. The Trade Diversification Corridors Fund will receive $5 billion over 7 years to invest in port and rail infrastructure. Another $1 billion over 4 years goes to Arctic infrastructure. The budget provides operational funding for the previously announced Major Projects Office, which aims to fast-track nation-building projects. The first project being referred to the office include energy and mining projects and port infrastructure.
One of the biggest buckets of spending in the budget was on infrastructure and community-level investments. The Build Communities Strong Fund will channel $51 billion over the next 10 years, followed by a subsequent $3 billion per year ongoing. This funding will be spent on local roads, bridges, water systems, universities and colleges, hospitals, and transit. It should be noted that some of this budget has been repurposed from other pre-existing funds. Now, a breakdown of that $51 billion includes just over $17 billion over 10 years via the provincial territorial stream, housing, health, education infrastructure, $6 billion for regionally significant projects like climate adaptation and large retrofits, and just over $27 billion for community infrastructures like roads, water systems, and recreation. The idea is that by strengthening the basic infrastructure and services, local communities and businesses gain productivity, lower costs, and stronger foundations for growth.
Another major aspect of the budget is housing and labor market measures. The government plans to admit 380,000 permanent residents annually from 2026 to 2028, down slightly from 2025's number. Temporary resident admission will be cut faster than previously planned. Overall, planned immigration flows over the next 2 years are cumulatively 290,000 lower than the previous targets, which will restrain Canada's population growth. The government will spend $1.7 billion over 13 years to recruit international talent and will launch an accelerated pathway for U.S. H-1B visa holders in the coming months. This is kind of an effort to steal tech talent from the United States. The budget pledges $13 billion over 5 years for Build Canada Homes, a new federal agency aiming to expedite construction of affordable, non-market housing, and eliminating GST for first-time homebuyers on homes up to $1 million, with reduced GST on homes between $1.15 million. This elimination of GST will cost the government $3.9 billion over 5 years, but does help first-time homebuyers. with affordability. It's worth noting that the housing pledges were all previously announced spending.
Under the heading of personal tax measures, that included reducing the first marginal personal income tax rate from 15% to 14.5% this year and down to 14% in 2026. This measure will cost the federal government about $27 billion over 6 years. There was also the canceling of the capital gains tax increase that was brought in by the previous Liberal government. That removal will cost the federal government about $23 billion over the next 6 years. Repealing the digital service tax in an effort to advance trade negotiations with the US this year, this measure will also cost about $6.8 billion to the federal government over the next 6 years. There was also the canceling of the consumer carbon tax, which will cost the federal government about $4.2 billion in this current fiscal year.
This budget is strategic and differs from previous Liberal budgets in the fact that there's more commitment to investment in productivity, things like infrastructure, housing initiatives, clean energy. So hopefully those investments will pay off and the deficit will reduce over time. If it does, it's superior to previous Liberal budgets that were based more on taxation and, handing out stimulus checks to low-income Canadians.
At the end of the day, this budget is just that. It's a budget that's being put out so that we can build a roadmap for the next 1, 5, 10 years. There was really no immediate point that came out in this budget that made us as advisors kind of take note and want to make changes in anybody's portfolio. These are all just making plans for the future. There was some really good points in there. As far as being Canadian goes, they're trying to safeguard jobs like in the steel industry. They're trying to broaden or diversify our trading partners, not be so reliant on one individual one. But there really wasn't any today impact. This is all just building for the future, and we'll wait and see how that plans out.
As always, we'll continue to monitor the situation, and if changes are warranted, we would let you know. But of course, if you do have any questions for us about this year's budget or how it might impact investment markets or your portfolio, feel free to reach out to us anytime. Always happy to chat.
Take care.